A very good afternoon, everybody. It's again that time of the day, time of the week. It's a Friday, and it's 3 o'clock. So it's time for Friday drinks. And today is a special one. Again, it's always special when we have a professor. You know, last week we had a professor, and he was great. Rufaro wasn't around, but today we have Professor Rukuni. And just before we started the show, he was telling me of the story when he was the board chair for Kingdom. And he says, you know, you thought he was old, and at that time he was 41. So,
I'm almost double that now.
so what would you call yourself now?
Well, I always I would say I'm maybe 22 with 50 years experience.
That works well. And today, I hear your favorite is a red, so we got you something special. But maybe you want to share exactly what we're having, what you guys are having today.
Well, yeah, we're having Rupert and Rothschild. It's a South African wine. It's a Bordeaux blend. It's one of the better ones. I think we've had it on the show before, so I'll let you do the honors with the first pour.
Sure. Here we go.
Yeah, somebody apparently, did well and gifted Tinashe a bottle of this. So we're delighted.
They
Thank
do
you so
know that
much.
I don't drink. Well, you better do the honors.
No,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
can. He can. I'll pour mine. He can have that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not good
Well, I
at
was saying-
pouring the wine, so
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. You can give him this glass. It's fine.
thank you.
So cheers, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us for this rabbit show. I think we're going to have
My
a fantastic
pleasure.
time together.
And I'm actually going to have my first Malawi shanty this summer season. And as usual, because the producer's away, we're going to encourage Schweppes, Mazoe Orange, whoever is making or is in charge of Mazoe Orange, please sponsor us because we've done so much for you guys and you need to support us. And that's what I'm going to have, a Malawi shanty. But maybe to just start off, maybe, Prof, you can just give us a bit of background about who you are and what you've done, and and then we can get into the real
To the weeds
reason
of
why
land
we are.
of land reform.
Right. No, I'm Mandi Rukuni. I'm a retired professor of agriculture. So now that I'm retired, of course, I just work for the wife. Otherwise, I was an academic for a long time, actually. I think my career as a university academic started in 1980, and I retired around 2000. But during my time, I was not a conventional academic, I don't think. So I used to do lots of things. I used to be in trouble a lot. I used to do I was hyperactive just like my mother and father, so I couldn't help it. It was not my fault. So I've served on boards, parastatals, private sector, name it, I have. And then in 2000, then I was invited to be the Africa director for the Kellogg Foundation. That's when I moved to Pretoria. I did that for 11 years. Was back here in 2009 at the invitation of both the government of Zimbabwe and the World Bank to facilitate the coming together of the government of national unity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you can imagine it was a crazy time. But I enjoyed it. So
was.
because it was now ZANU-PF and MDC trying to form a government. So I was the main facilitator. I had a team of 6. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I've continued to work as a consultant. I have spent a lot of time actually advising also the Africa Union, the NEPAD, on the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Program, CADP. So, yeah, I still do advise a few governments on things like land governance, agriculture, education, science and technology. So, yeah, I'm retired, but
You've got
Still
you
very
still have an
active.
active
still
mind.
not tired.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Getting
Warren
tired,
Buffett,
but not quite too tired.
you know, Warren Buffett is what now, 96?
Yeah, I think it's 94, 96.
96. And
Can you
he was in an office. He was still in the office last year.
Yeah.
and
No,
he had a
this year
full-on-
he's actually
this year.
he retires
end
end
of
of
this-
this month,
Yeah.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
96.
and I think his partner Charlie Munger didn't retire, and he died at 99, and
Yeah.
he was still working. He was still vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah. So one of the things that we sort of try and promote is for people not to retire.
To just
Because
stay
human
active.
beings, if you look at just human beings have never retired.
No.
Or, well, technically when they died,
Yeah.
that's when they retire. But, you know.
Yeah. Which is part of my challenge, because I think rest. There will be time then that you're going to rest forever.
Forever.
So why waste time resting now?
True,
So
true.
when they pull me down, at that point, I don't want anybody to be crying, because everybody should be saying, no, 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 no.
He deserves to rest.
Please, don't
he
cry.
had a good
Otherwise,
innings.
otherwise you will come back.
So you know, maybe we can start off at a very high level, you know, philosophically thinking about not
Well,
just
let me just introduce the topic.
Sure,
So
sure.
that we're all very clear on what we want to talk about. So the reason why we're having this particular show is so that we talk about land tenure. What we're really interested in is the tenure system. And it so happens that in 1993, Prof. Rukuni was actually the chairperson of a committee that was set up by the president of the country then, Robert Gabriel Mugabe. And this was on the land tenure, just looking at the land tenure system and try and devise the best land tenure system in Zimbabwe. And we know that currently, again, this has become a very topical issue. So we thought, you know what, let's do a rabbit hole session where we bring an expert, and Professor Rukuni is probably the right person for us to do so. Also because he's a traditionalist. You know, he understands the pre-colonial Africa better than we do. So
For sure.
he can you know, give us a glimpse of what life and what tenure was like then. We will push back a bit and we will have an interesting discussion. But yeah, so you can then bring your philosophy.
No, sure. So I wanted to start off, you know, just, you know, before we get into the weeds of the land reform and tenure, just the whole idea of redistribution, you know, at a societal level, you know, wealth redistribution. Is this something that in general makes sense, you know, anywhere? And historically, do we have good examples of it producing the desired outcomes?
Yeah.
Well, you know, where do you stand on that?
So let me start by just pointing out that these conversations make more sense if we're all debating and arguing at the same strategic level of analysis. So my experience over the last 40 years with issues to do with development generally and land in particular is you could be arguing at 2, 3, 4 different levels, and you think you are still in one argument. So I've learned to then try and phrase and frame issues at the highest possible strategic perspective, so that then when you come down, at least you may still have the same level of framing strategically. So to answer your question, I would say the highest level of framing this issue is, number one, there's no single fully industrialized high-income country which did not start with an agricultural revolution. And without exception, that agricultural revolution starts with small farms in large numbers, aggregating products into manufacturing. And then the cities become viable because food is abundant, the cost of raw material is low. That's proper orthodox structural transformation, simplified. So, following colonization, so I want you to understand what colonization did to land and agriculture. So all colonization did was, here are civilizations which are trying to upgrade themselves at their own pace. So they come in, they're already a fully industrialized society. So when these British, as an example, come to Zimbabwe or Kenya or wherever, they come in and build cities and impose an industrial system on a system which is trying to industrialize bottom up, which is the only proper way to industrialize fully. But when you impose a new industrial, what you might call regime, what happens is you only have a few thousand large farms supplying all of industry. The rest are disconnected. What you create is a dual economy. It took me 30 years to figure out why in Africa and Latin America and Asia, not many countries have succeeded. Is it corruption? Is it just stupidity? What is it? Well, the statistic is that no single African country is a fully industrialized high-income country. No single African country is not a dual economy. We say the same thing about Latin America. Not one single country in Latin America is not a dual economy and not in a middle income trap. So you can put issues of good governance, politics, and all this stuff aside. At the highest strategic level, you can then say, as long as you're a dual economy, the only way to dismantle a dual economy, and we have learned that from the few Asian countries who have succeeded. No single African country has succeeded, no single South American country has succeeded, only a few Asian tigers and dragons. And without exception, maybe the exception will be city-states like Singapore. You can only dismantle a dual economy by looking at this mass population which is disconnected from manufacturing and industrial tertiary economic activities. Connect them to the modernizing part of the economy. And if you're a highly dualized economy, it becomes more and more politically difficult, which we can talk about that later, is the political economy element of it. So in summary, if you put politics and other things aside, you just look at any economy or society. If it's a labor-abundant economy, you don't need a few large farms. You don't need labor-saving technology. You need labor-utilizing technology. And you need to bring all that land, as many small farms as possible, aggregating product to manufacturing, not to Mbaremsika and Sakuva. Manufacturing is the only solution to linking agriculture to an industrial society. So yeah, it's no surprise, therefore, that in extreme cases, there's no political economy solution to the rather unequal land distribution like we had in Zimbabwe. I'm sorry to say there's no obvious way out of that one. And the revolution and the land distribution revolution is usually unavoidable.
Okay. No, thank you very much for that. I will push back just slightly, just a bit. I think that was a very good synopsis of especially what has been happening in Africa and in Asia, for the most part of Latin America as well. But I would say that the human race and the history of the human race, when you look at colonialism and this dualism that you're talking about, has been part of us. There's nothing unique about Africa being colonized. The Romans colonized Europe and more particularly the UK. And you see that they would literally impose their system. And part of colonialism and imposition of it, I'm not taking a moral view. I'm just being realistic and practical and pragmatic, and say that the history of human beings, slavery, colonialism, all these isms that we talk about have been part of us. But that did not negate civilization and development. One could argue that actually propagated and accelerated civilization. When Alexander the Great goes to Asia, what he's also going with means of production and means of doing things. And I'm not taking a moral view. So what I'm trying to contextualize is what's happening in Zimbabwe or what happened in Africa was nothing unique.
Well, yes and no. So in terms of modern industrial society, starting with England 200 years ago, very different analytical framework to pre-industrial stage. So when you look at the Roman Empire, the Greek empires, all those empires were not industrialized society. They were just clan societies, which were the ones that had better technology to overrun the other would
do so.
But it was not an industrial issue. So what I was describing earlier is the modern industrial society, which is a result of the new city, in fact, call it a city-state model that the Romans eventually passed on to the rest of Europe. So if you look at towards the end of the Roman Empire, so during the Roman Empire, you're right, but I would argue also that you're 100% right. But you could also look at religion as a form of industrialization, which is what the empires would do. And the two most, in your terms, successful empires were Ottoman Empire and the Roman Empire. What made those the most successful then? Religion. Force a common religion across all the different clans and religions and languages that you conquer. Force one religion on them. That's why the Romans created Roman Catholic Church. I mean, Jesus was not a Christian. They created Christianity 300 years after Jesus was gone. and the Ottomans created Islam. So that's a form of industrialization in a sense of get a good idea that can pull people together.
That must produce the idea.
So industrialization in the sense I'm talking about can be defined beyond just technological aspects.
Okay.
Any idea that will get people to increase production, productivity, diversify their production-based relations is a form of industrialization. So in that sense, you are right. But modern sense of industrialization, which starts with England, that is when, for the first time, we have now mass growth of manufacturing in the cities. But remember, after Rome...
So you're saying to the detriment of labor?
No, I'm actually saying that when you have an agricultural revolution, meaning, like in the case of England, you have a solution to increasing production with less resources.
Yes.
So what happens is you have an abundance of food at lower cost. And that is what makes it possible to feed the cities, which were death traps. Up until then, what city was worth living in? You will live with rats and disease and all over the place. All of European cities were death traps.
That's true.
Until England became the first industrialized society. Then you had a different type of relationship between rural and urban. And for the first time, you have mass growth in manufacturing as opposed to industrialization. Manufacturing changes everything, lower cost of production, better quality of product. And
living standards actually increase.
And that is what got England to be the first new type of colonial power. It was the new Romans or Greeks.
Yes.
Up until then, the Chinese had the biggest. They were the world superpower, isn't it?
Yes, they were the first, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to double click on something you said earlier about the dual nature of the economies in Africa and Latin America,
And Asia
which are
too.
and Asia, and you make the case that the Asian tigers and dragon actually transcended this challenge of having a dual economy, and this is how they've been able to become developed and prosperous.
Yeah.
So at what point did we diverge? Latin America and Africa, we're still dual economies, we're still poor, and the Asian tigers and the dragon actually industrialized and became prosperous and developed and rich. So at what point did we, because if you look back to the 1950s and 60s, we were all exiting colonialism.
Yes.
At the same time, Singapore was a colony of the UK, and a lot of the Asian tigers were colonies as well.
Yeah.
We were equally underdeveloped and poor, and getting out of colonialism in the 1960s. So where did we diverge? What did they get right, or rather, what did we get wrong?
They got a couple of things right, which we never got right, and we still don't have them right. Even half of Asia still isn't getting it right. So here's where they got it right. The first is what you might call understanding of political economy. Okay. Because what colonialism does, it separates politics from economics. Because to be a colonial master, you have to tell your subjects, stay out of politics. You can talk business, but you can't talk politics. You get that point?
Yep.
Okay. There's no fully industrialized society anywhere where you separate politics from economics. That's why they are big. It's because politics is always about contestation around resources and opportunities, isn't it? Even in the family, what is politics? You father, where are you putting the resources? You want to repair your car whilst my chickens are serving? Political economy is a skill to manage the challenges that come up around contestation of resources. The Asian tigers figured that out brilliantly, and we can talk about that a bit later. That's the first thing they figured out. The second thing they figured out is we can do our land reform program without any problem because they're already kind of united. They did massive land reform programs, gave the land to the smallholder farmer. But guess what? And that is where I think your answer you're looking for. What they did right was that the moment they target the rural areas to uplift those smallholder farmers, the budget architecture and the government policies towards supporting those farmers is literally tipped upside down. They get more budget to the rural areas, they put in the roads, they put in water systems, they drive technology down there, they basically invest in knowledge and skills there to produce and manufacture. And they declare village and township manufacturing. Forget manufacturing in Harare. China, 1980. Remember 1980, they turned around. That's the latest to answer your question. Mm-hmm. So what China did right in 1980 was forget the commune system. Forget selling all your produce to government or to the GMB in our case. Forget that. We'll come in and give you the infrastructure. We'll push the technology. We'll bring the financial services right there. When you produce, you can sell to anyone. You don't have to sell to government. And guess what? We will support village and township manufacturing because you don't need to manufacture milli in Harare in the capital city. That's nonsense. Kuputisa maputi Harare. That's what we are doing here. Bulawayo, Nairobi, Lagos, Johannesburg. You manufacture in the village and townships because that's where you need
the raw material.
Yeah, but industrialization is basically massification of the process, mass production of the raw material, mass manufacturing and adding value within a short distance, 15 to 25, 30 kilometers. And then mass consuming your own manufactured goods and services. Now you have the strongest economy. But you know what? I only figured this out over the last 15 or 20 years, but I kept thinking, no, man.
How did you get the epiphany?
Well, the first thing that it's a series of things. 1981 was my first time to the United States. I'd done 3 years in England, and I could figure out why they colonized us, and now they did it. But when I got to the US, I said to myself, these are communists. They tell everyone else they are communists. These are the real communists. Everyone in the United States then could afford anything, but the levels were different. Everyone, garbage collectors, name it, they could have a car, they could have a fridge, they could have a television, but the television will be $50. If you earn $30,000 a year or more, you can buy a Sony from Japan. So, but mass production and mass processing and mass consuming your own goods and services is what makes it possible for the majority of people to enjoy locally manufactured goods and services at a low cost. Then the millionaires can import. We are the opposite. Even at the lowest level, we are consuming imported manufactured goods, toothpicks, tomato sauce, dog biscuits.
Okay. On that note,
Okay.
Prof,
All right. I
we need
overdid
to-
it there. Okay.
No, we're just getting started. Okay. We need to take a break, and Omari is actually sponsoring this particular episode. Thank you very much, Omari. Prof, I would encourage you to actually get their card, especially their Visa card. When we were traveling,
Who is Omari? Tell me more.
okay, so Omari is part of the Old Mutual Group,
okay.
and it's their fintech company, and it's a bank wallet.
Okay.
So everything that you need as far as banking is concerned is just in your wallet, and it's an app, and it does wonders. You don't need to go to a branch. You don't need to, you can pick up money anywhere where there's an agent, and it's got a Visa card, and wherever you travel, you can use it. And the transaction costs are pretty low.
Wow.
And, so far my experience with it has been great. And you can cash in and cash out.
Omari.
Yes.
Yep.
Omari.
Yes.
Brilliant.
There you
branding,
go.
eh?
So join us in the second segment.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much to Omari for actually sponsoring this particular show and for being with us for the last 3-4 months. We really do appreciate it. So we'll continue the conversation with Prof. Rukuni, and that was just a philosophical expose on some of the major issues around land tenure and distribution, and why it's actually there and not, and the dual economy. We learned a few things, and we learned that Prof. Realized or had this epiphany the first time when he went to the US, which was in 81, 82. And we'll get more into those.
How old were you?
We're just being born.
Okay.
But so what we are going to do is to get into land tenure, and to start off, Prof is probably the right person to talk about the history of pre-colonial land tenure. What did it look like? Because I think we were, especially this part of Africa, we were nomads. We were moving through. So I would assume that we didn't even have a particular land tenure. If you use the particular land and if it's no longer useful, you just move on.
Yeah.
But maybe just give us your idea or your thinking around the history. So the facts, pre-colonial Africa. What was land tenure like?
So pre-colonial Africa had actually evolved quite significantly before colonization. So yes, we start with kind of nomadic pastoral systems, especially in drier parts of Africa. But as you get into the wetter parts of Africa, those quickly evolved into what you might call mixed agricultural systems, agro-pastoral. They settled agriculture, but they still kept their animals, goats and sheep and so on. So Central Africa specifically, if you a broader Central Africa, which includes Zimbabwe, Zambia, and we were settled farmers here 2,000 years before Jesus was born. Okay, it's a very important fact to remember. 2,000 years before Jesus was born, we were settled farmers. We also had pastoralists and agro-pastoralists. By the time Zimbabwe is colonized by the British, don't forget that we had the first Zimbabwe had, in terms of attempt by colonials, it was the Portuguese. Remember, the Portuguese came in from the east. They settled around, but they were really just trading most of the time until they eventually decided to settle a bit. By the 16th century, they were, by the 17th century, they were now really settling, working with the Mtapas, and they did well. Eventually, they kind of overran the Mtapas and started running rings around them, getting farms, large swathes of land, etc., etc. And that's when Changamire Dombo rebelled and fought the Portuguese and defeated them.
Yes.
Pushed them back, militarily, spiritually, psychologically, out. So when the British come to colonize us in 1890, we were pretty much a highly settled society in terms of agriculture. We domesticated all the crops that remain traditional crops. All the different types of grains were already settled, were already domesticated. If you came in with the Portuguese, from South America, tomatoes, the Western type of potato, and so on and so on. So agricultural, in terms of land tenure, do you mind if I go the opposite direction and just define for you what makes it? Yeah. So here is. Anyway. So if I give you I can't help myself. I have to be a professor for 1 minute. I'll give you a 1 minute lecture on what land tenure is.
Okay.
Land tenure is about land rights and how those land rights are governed. And in a simplified way, there are 4 main rights. Okay. The first important right is your right to use land. And that right is usually then defined by what you can use the land for. So the land right is just use the land. You're always governed by what you can use the land for. You can farm, yes. You can build, no. You can bury the dead, no. So the rights have to be clarified, but they are use rights. Mm-hmm. Then the next set of rights are your transfer rights. Can you sell to somebody else? Can you bequeath to your children? Can you subdivide and off? What are the transfer rights? The third set of rights is exclusion rights. Can you exclude everyone from enjoying the same rights on that piece of land? Or there are some who would come through, for instance, some may not have the cropping rights, but they would have rights to graze on your piece of land during the dry season. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then the final set of rights is who protects you, your right to be, for those rights to be protected. That if somebody else is trying to violate those rights, there's an intervention by a higher authority. Those 4 rights are not different in any way between traditional systems, pre-colonial and the colonial system.
Okay.
So it's a myth that traditional land tenure systems are different from Western-style land tenure systems. Identical in terms of these rights. What differs is how they are governed. Yeah. So a lot of Westerners, when they come to Africa, they are not telling us 100% of the truth. They are saying, your truth is a lie. My truth is the only truth. Everything, from the education system, religion, everything. Your God, no, that's a lie. My God, now that's the real God. Mm-hmm. Your system of inheritance, that's stupid. Mine, That's the right one. Everything was baby with the bathwater. Okay. So when we teach land tenure, it's very important to understand that it's not either or. It's defining those land rights and then figuring out how they are governed. And that is where we have a problem because following colonization, all of Africa, we have not cleaned out that mess. We have a duality. The dual economy is just one form of duality. We have dual legal system, dual education system. You learn something at home is different when you go to school.
Okay.
So we can discuss the land tenure.
Well, just on the 4 rights that you gave us, use rights, I can actually see how that can happen because, communal areas, I think that system is still there. You're given the rights to use the land. So the power, I can sort of understand that because the chief holds the power. Sabuku decides who, or the patriarch.
Today's system, but not the traditional system. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe
today's traditional system. Yeah.
Today, maybe you can get into that. But what
Later,
I can't get my head around is the
Transfer rights. Yeah.
Transfer rights. Could you maybe help us how transfer rights actually occurred in pre-colonial Africa?
So in pre-colonial Africa, Zimbabwe specifically, you allocated land by the chief. Land is allocated to the family, not to the individual. The family then has a right to further subdivide that land to their children. And what appears to be patriarchal is also a figment of the imagination because under our own system, your own father had a right to allocate land to you as the son. But guess what? You would never allocate that land to you until you got married. You had no right to own land if you're not going to have a family. So, and for that reason, the day you get married and the formal system has gone through, guess who is shown the piece of land? It's not you, your wife. Your wife was the one that your father says, now that my son is married to you, this is your land. Okay. No, there's a lot of untruth about traditional system. And I know you youngsters, now I'm angry with you guys. Because you think you were talking about patriarchal, all that. It was a figment of the imagination because the Africans are a very interesting culture. What it appears to be is not quite what it is. Women who appear to be powerless in an African setting, the traditionals, they were more powerful than men, but in public. When you go drinking, you tell other men, what? You allow your wife to do that? Not in my home. But when you get home, what do? You behave yourself. You know who is in charge.
I wish Zia was.
Maybe that doesn't change
was here to have this conversation. I think he would have a strong opinion. But look, I want to push back a little bit on what you said about truths. Western truths and African truths, because I tend to be of the view that certain systems work better than others, right? So the Romans conquered the world at some point. They colonized the UK. They built roads. They introduced them to title deeds. There's a reason why it's called Roman Dutch law, and we still use a lot of the thinking that is around Roman Dutch law. So there are certain systems that have stood the test of time that work better than other systems. And that's not to necessarily say all Western systems are better than pre-colonial African systems, but that's just to say that over the course of history, some systems produce more success than others. And I would make the case that if you think about land tenure and title, the Western system with deeds and all the freehold property and the rights that accompany them tend to produce better economic outcomes in terms of growth and prosperity than some of the traditional African tenure systems.
Yeah. So you know what? I'll agree with you that every civilization will have some fairly advanced ideas which work better than others. Where I would disagree a little bit is to say that when you take that idea, it is culture neutral. You can plug it out of Rome, you can plug it out of the United States, stick it into India, and it should just work because it is working in the United States. That is where I would differ with you. So the inability to put our heads around what idea do you borrow elsewhere and not just copy and paste it, which is what Africans are doing. Copy and paste. Show me a copy that is better than the original. Never happens. What you do is you borrow ideas from other civilizations. By the time you are done with the idea, it's an African idea. That's what the Japanese mastered. The first non-European civilization to figure out how to borrow ideas from Western civilization. By the time they are done with that idea, you won't recognize it as European anymore because they are not like us Africans. Copy and paste, they take it and adapt it to their situation. If we look at Western style title deed, as I say, there's nothing unique about it. It's an end result of an industrial society. It's not the beginning. So now we are treating it as you start with title deeds and then you end up with an fully industrialized society. No. Give me one Western country which started without a traditional system of tenure and only adapted it to what it is today because of industrialization. Okay, so I would say that a Roman Dutch law is stuck with us mostly for one important reason. The Romans were the first to codify law. Okay. They were the first to say, if we have decided this is law, it has to be written down. And then you can go to court. Then you can, well, if we have done just the law, they were the first ones to do that. The rest of Europe were not codifying law. What is English law? How many laws do we have in Zimbabwe today? You know Roman Dutch law more than English law. Why? Because English law was never codified. And yet, our court system is predominantly English law. When you go to take your law degree at Great Zimbabwe University, which is mine, or University of Zimbabwe, you only know Roman Dutch law. Go to our High Court, 75% of the cases are tried using case law, English. Okay, the reason we are calling it Roman Dutch law is because when the British colonized Cape,
yeah,
okay, they brought with them Roman Dutch law from England. They also brought with them English law. By the time we were colonized here, we have Roman Dutch law, English law, and African law. Show me one university law school which teaches African law. Zilch. And because it's not codified, it makes it sound like it's a stupid law. And yet, it was the best. But let me push back on you and say, if we look back at civilization as a whole, wouldn't you agree with me that maybe half the case is not a more advanced civilization which is overrunning? It's just they just have bigger bombs and bigger clubs and bigger ships. There are many instances where an inferior civilization will overwhelm a more advanced civilization.
yes,
And then there are cases where it's the other way around, I don't deny, but I don't think in our case we were necessarily overrun by a more sophisticated civilization.
yeah,
Because the level of brutality that the British brought here, you have no idea because you never saw it. It's not in the history books. It's not well written. It is the most brutal treatment that Africans got here to a point where the trauma is still with you. part of the reason why you still believe in a lot of what they brought. Some of it is because it's right. I'm not denying. Some of it is just because you are afraid not to believe it, especially religion. Most people believe that nonsense because you're afraid not to believe what you were told by the master. Because honestly, you think
That would be Nkanya, not me.
He's a non-believer, but I'm a believer.
Because the best thing you see with people who still believe what they believe because they were told, not because they really know, is the level of emotion that goes into. Yeah, and most of the time.
Well, okay, so from both of you, I'll tell you how I look at it when I look at past civilizations. So even when you look at the Japanese and you look at the Chinese and Egyptian civilizations, and this is pre-colonial, our pre-colonial time, but from time immemorial, there is no civilization that is puritanical. Every civilization, in fact, how it progresses is because it is really a meshing of different ideas from different people. In fact, they were very open to foreigners because part of being open to foreigners was then you could have your indaba and borrow ideas and say, oh, this is what we do wherever we're coming from. And you're like, oh, maybe that's something that we can integrate. So there is no civilization that started in one particular way and has endured over thousands of years in that particular way. There is always this mixing and integration of different ideas and different cultures. Even culture itself evolves.
I like that.
Yeah. So that's the view I take, and I think that where I will push back from both of you is today's misunderstanding of society, where we almost believe that we're headstrong in a particular belief. That actually civilizations that have done very well were never headstrong in any particular belief.
Yeah.
They integrated different beliefs.
Yeah.
So I think that where I agree with you about how the Japanese state was able to modernize itself, or its empire was able to modernize itself, is its ability to integrate foreign ideas and make them their own, or to change them and then, particularize them as their own and then progress from there.
So, but I think there's a false dichotomy, so there are some ideas that, like, that's why we have the expression of not reinventing the wheel, right? The wheels work, right? The wheel has not evolved over the last several millennia.
Yeah,
right?
true.
It's just a fantastic idea and it works. And then obviously there's certain things that benefit from evolution and improvement over time. And, I like that you guys talk about the Japanese. One of the things that's interesting about Japanese history is that, MacArthur, the general, was actually in charge of Japan from 1945 to 1951, right? And he basically wrote the constitution and he basically reorganized Japanese society and put them on the path to rebuilding post-World War II. And it's arguable that without that strong American intervention and direction, it might not have successfully bounced back from World War II the way that it did. And it's an unpopular opinion, but sometimes what takes societies forward is being conquered and or colonized and adopting some of the better methods of the conqueror.
Yeah, well, where I agree with you, because what you said to me is closest to a spiritual statement, and I tend to resonate with that. If I put it my own way, you are going down this path which says, well, at the highest level, diversity is the thing. I mean, the creator, whoever that is, does not intend us to be the same. There's 9 billion people in the world. Not even one is identical to the others. We could be 100 billion people. The system is capable to make everything different. And yet we're all made from the same atoms, the same with the trees, the dogs, the cats. So diversity is all the universe is interested in. If you're going to enjoy life differently, you need more diversity. The challenge comes when within that diversity, we now want to standardize. We now want to force one idea. That's where the problem is. So how do you do that? Either you do it spiritually by first acknowledging that we're all different, it's important to stay different, but we still have mutual respect of our different ideas. When I respect your own beliefs, even though I don't agree with them, but I respect you having your own beliefs. So mutual respect, mutual benefit, mutual responsibility is ultimately the only three principles which would allow the great diversity to always come together and resolve our issues. When it comes to religion, I think the biggest problem is doctrine-driven religion. As long as religion is below the culture, I have not encountered any civilization where religion has become a problem. And African civilization always had religion under a culture. In other words, why? Because who knows? I mean, there are many things we will never have answers to. So what makes you think that your own religion is the correct one? So it's more important to say, you're a Soko, Mukanya.
Yeah.
Here.
Yes.
Your own way to wherever is fine. I'm a Moyo, and I'm sure you have never, ever, and I'm sure you have never, ever. It doesn't matter how much you would admire a Moyo, but you have never wanted to be a Moyo, have you?
No.
You see? Now, that's the beauty of African religion. You don't want to be anyone else but your own. But we all know that we are all tributaries ending up in the same river. It's ultimately the same God. So why worry about everyone should be the same? Putting on uniforms. It's a way of trying to force you. And by the way, the Japanese and Chinese did not need colonization to advance. I don't agree. The Japanese were already ahead of Western civilization. They already started studying it. They just made a stupid mistake in the Second World War and went to the wrong side. And there's a Japanese professor who convinced me that these Japanese were way ahead. This professor was in a meeting I was in Maputo, where I was a keynote speaker on the issue of African agriculture. And I did a brilliant presentation. I almost got a standing ovation. But at tea time, the Japanese professor walked up to me and said, "Professor, yeah, that was good, but I don't think you still get it." I said, "What?" He says, "Here's what we did in Japan, which you guys need to do. If you don't, you're just talk. You will never get any place." He says, after the Second World War, we decided we've lost the war. But guess what? Now we'll have to rebuild our economy. By the time we start rebuilding our economy, we then figured out the fastest way of getting where we want to go. We pick any sector that we pick, we need to be at the top. So we decide motor industry, railways, electronics. We want to be on top of the world, and each one of those we pick, and we either create a university or an institution that learns everything in the world about railways. If we're going to build a bullet train, like they did, if we're going to start manufacturing cars better than everyone else, we learn everything to do with automotive manufacturing. And he says, we don't start anything until we got it. When we start, you add 0.0001%, we're on top of the world. And look what they did. They were on top of the world, electronics, motor industry, railways. So I think that's where we are missing it in Africa. We think it's about either copying and pasting, or we learn what we learn. It's about taking an industry and understanding it in your own situation, in your region, on the continent, in the world. You know, earlier on I was talking about my first time to the United States, but even recently as 2017, in fact, before I went to the US, I went to College of Agriculture, and we had one statistic in the 60s, which was very interesting. Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia then, was the third largest producer of tobacco and the second largest exporter. Brazil was the second largest producer of tobacco and the largest exporter. The United States was the largest producer of tobacco in the world, did not import any tobacco, did not export any tobacco. They were the largest importer of tobacco from Brazil and Zimbabwe. That domestic market, when you build your industry from bottom up and almost everyone in your economy is in that middle income bracket, they can consume products from the whole world. Yeah. That's what you need to build for an industrial society. That's what China has now done.
Yeah.
As recent as 2017, I was in Washington, D.C. for a World Bank meeting, and a South African friend of mine who is a wine connoisseur, he really understands his wine, also being South African. And like him, I always believed that the South African red wines are really some of the best in the world.
South African wine in general is phenomenal.
Yeah. And we were seated there. And he got this American wine, which was really great. It's midnight or something. He says, now I admit this does beat most South African red wines. The following day, we were all over the place looking for it. And he bought a few bottles, and then we said, let's find out who manufactures this wine. We were on the internet. This company was in California. He gave them a ring. What do I do if I want to buy a few cases of this wine for South Africa? And on the other side, the answer was, what? Where are you from? We don't export. We don't even distribute our product. The distributors come and buy it from us. We just go into the shop and buy yourself a bottle. We went back on the internet to find out what's wrong with the wine industry in the world. South Africa is number 9. US is the largest wine industry in the world. But you won't find one bottle of American wine anywhere else in the world
outside
except
of America.
the United States.
Yeah.
They consume all their wine.
Their products. Yeah.
They consume all their products. We are busy trying to export so that we get US dollar. We are drunk with the US dollar. We are addicted. We don't even know that thing is going to fall like a ton of lead in a few years. In a decade, there won't be any currency called US dollar. It will be like a zig or worse. That US dollar of yours.
On that note, we got a break, but just one particular correction on Japan. So something that a lot of people don't know is that actually Japan's economic growth in the 1920s, the 100 years, so 1822 to 1920, it was bound to become the largest economy.
Yeah.
And you know who actually did that study? Was Joseph Schumpeter's wife.
Oh.
So Joseph Schumpeter, obviously, he studied.
I'm a big fan of Schumpeter. I didn't realize his wife was also an economist.
His wife was an economist. His second wife. Or third wife. Yeah. I forget. But anyway, his wife was an economist. And they moved from Austria to America. So when they moved to America, her study was purely on the Japanese. Now, if you think this is, in the 1920s, late 1920s, wow. It was before the information age. Yeah. So people didn't know what was happening in Japan.
Yeah.
So her study was to actually show that actually for the last 100 years, you Americans think that you've been developing, but there's this empire that's actually Japan that has been growing. Okay, it's slightly less than America, but in the next 100 years, it will be bigger than America. Yeah. So that was, I think, so it's not quite correct to say, I hear your point, and I do identify with that point, that the Americans were able to do something for Japan, but on its own, it was actually rising. And I think there's an interesting book called Japan, The Defeat of Japan, or something to that effect. And I think part of it was and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just my thought. But this idea of being a colonial power is also has its limitations because Japan saw itself, its imperialism,
Yeah.
and going into China.
Yeah.
I think that was wrong.
That was wrong.
You know, and I think that them then looking at themselves and not really, you know, this adventurism outside actually helped them. And I think that's where the Americans came in.
Yeah.
Because if Japan had its own army, who knows
Where-
what
yeah.
they could have done. But without an army, they had to focus on their own
Yeah.
civilization.
And I want to close, but you have just triggered an important point on Japan and Asia. So the Americans, after Second World War, literally forced land reform in Japan, in South Korea. Well, okay, Philippines. They actually forced those nations to do a land reform for the reasons I'm explaining. Come to Africa, they would argue against land reform.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
Okay.
So we take a break and we will get into actual land reform
Yeah.
and
In
we'll bring it to
Zimbabwe,
the
yeah.
present.
In Zimbabwe.
We'll bring it to the present. And you can see this is why we have rabbit hole sessions. There's no limit. We just go down the rabbit. And whatever comes, we think it will be useful, especially with policymakers and with us as Zimbabweans and creating a conversation around these issues. I hope you're enjoying this as much as we are. Let's hear a word from Omari.
You can also be happy with the Mandi Visa card, the best Visa card in town. Get your Mandi Visa card today by sending hi on the WhatsApp number 0787 707 707 now. Get the Mandi Visa card to shop online, swipe anywhere, and withdraw cash at any ATM in the world today.
Welcome back. It's Friday Drinks, and this is what we do on a Friday, especially in December. It's the silly season, so for us, we get to indulge. And today, the producer's away, so this could be however many hours. We're thoroughly enjoying this. And you guys, how's your wine?
Oh, brilliant. It's really nice.
Okay.
I'm enjoying it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no,
And
it's Bordeaux blends are fantastic, and this is one of the better ones. So yeah, cheers, Prof. We're having a great time.
you didn't thank me.
Oh yeah. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
thank
Mukanya. And for those who are into gifting Mukanya, please continue with the alcoholic beverages. They'll end up on the show, and I will gingerly consume them.
Yeah. So the conversation really is, so we want to bring it to the present. I think that was a good historical analysis and just understanding the different dynamics. And I like the fact that we've looked at Asia, we've looked at Europe, we've looked at America, and we've looked at Africa and the different systems and how they're all meshing into a particular thinking. And so we won't really discuss a lot about the colonial system. I think the most fundamental thing was 1930 and 1969, as far as Zimbabwe is concerned, which really defined
Right.
a particular land tenure. But what I want to do is to bring us to 1993. And the president appoints you as chairperson of the land tenure system. Maybe just give us a bit of background on why Mugabe did this and why 1993 was a pivotal year, because this is before what we now term as the land reform that then happened in 99, 2000. So, 1993. What's the significance of that period and era, and why the land tenure system was actually, why that particular committee was set up?
So, actually, Zimbabwe is a very, very interesting case, because if you go to 1980 independence, by 1981, the new government had passed new policies to really support smallholder farmers to be part of the economy. So you can imagine the initial phase was very successful. Between 1980 and 83, we saw smallholder farmers grow from Between 1950 and 1980, the average at which the smallholder farmers supplied the GMB with maize grain was 7%. Between 1980 and 83, it jumped to 55%. Similar growth with cotton and other crops. So there was a lot of excitement around it, and it was mainly because government pushed new policies to open up the grain marketing board depots throughout the whole country, not just the white farming areas. The Agricultural Finance Corporation was instructed and mandated to also give loans to smallholder farmers. So there were a number of positive policies that made it possible to have that massive growth within 3 years. But then it picked off. It didn't go beyond that. And like I was saying earlier, if I knew then what I know now, 40 years later, I would have said, hey, we're in a middle income trap. We're in a dual economy. These farmers are still basically disconnected. But no, we thought this is a brilliant, Zimbabwe, we thought we had an economy, it looked good.
Bread basket of...
Bread basket, and all that. It was a learning curve. By 1990, it's very clear we are not going anywhere. In fact, before that, remember we even had to concede to go through the economic structural adjustment program. Remember that?
Yes, ESAP.
ESAP, which we eventually, ESAP is eventually was renamed to Satan Apano. We're not going anyplace. And there are many reasons given. And land tenure was one of them. And don't forget, at this point, the entire global north and South Africa are telling Zimbabweans, and the white farmers in Zimbabwe are telling our government, it's because of your land tenure system. You think you can succeed without a title deed? They never told us that Japan did not need a title deed, China did not need a title deed, South Korea did not need a title deed. You just need secure land rights, okay, and connected farmers. So this was an attempt to try and explain. Right. So the Commission of Inquiry into Land Tenure Systems was established, and I was asked to chair it. I was 43 years old then. And I learned a lot. I'm telling you, and I can actually say this to you because I've said it before, after I thought about it afterwards. That is when I realized how far lost I was through Western education. But in 1993, I was just a university professor. Already I was getting accolades, and I'm thinking, I know stuff, And the Western education was up here in my head. But when I chaired the Land Tenure Commission and I went out, we did 47 districts over a 12-month period, 47, out of 50-something. By the time we did the third province, I could not believe what I was hearing. We're trying to tell these people, you need a title deed. Not this stuff you're doing over here, but they're pushing back at us and saying, well, yes and no. That's when I figured out from mentors and other scholars that it's not about African title tenure system or Western. It's about land rights. You need secure land rights. Don't call it Western or African. As long as those rights are secure on the basis of those four, you're fine. You can industrialize. Okay. So that's when I learned that we'd thrown away so many good ideas. For instance, land tenure or land governance system is a microcosm of how the whole of society is governed. Okay. If there's no strong governance system in the village level, you're going to crash because you're not yet an industrialized society. So what we're doing is abandoning the traditional governance systems across the board, and hoping that somehow by putting WADCOs and VIDCOs and declaring rural district council, all that stuff, somehow we're going to be an industrialized society. Well, the point is that it's about rights, and now they're governed. It's not about whether it's traditional or Western. But anyway, I chaired the commission over a period of 12 months. That's when I turned back into traditionalist. I was brought up in a African black middle class family. My family, my parents were the wealthiest people in the district I was born in, probably even the whole province, because they were able even to eventually go into the white areas in 1962 when the whites opened up a bit. They bought a farm here it was Hartley, 13,000 acres of land. They were that wealthy, although Ian Smith then confiscated the farm after they declared independence. But I was brought up in that. My parents
were they business people? Were they farmers?
Sorry?
Your parents, were they business people or were they farmers?
My parents started off as professionals, trained as nurses, both of them in the 30s. But by 1948, they'd made so much money, they went back home and started running businesses, shops, trucks, name it. They were running a pretty diversified business. So they became pretty wealthy. Then they bought their first farm in the African purchase areas in the late 50s. And then by that time, because they were doing so well, they were approached by the then more liberal Garfield Todd's government at the time. Were trying to dismantle the Land Apportionment Act. And in the process of doing that, that's when the Rhodesia Front was established to
push back on that.
To push back on that. So the mistake that Garfield Todd and his team made was thinking they were going to win the 1962 elections. But that's the reason they lost the election, because nationalism. So the white people would know, even the liberal ones thought, well, we defeated these people, this is our land. So Rhodesia Front won the elections in December 1962. By 1965, my parents had been evicted, amongst another of 6 or 7 blacks. But anyway, so there I was, and actually that's one of the reasons why my parents, both parents would say to me, better get a good education. Eh? It's not good enough being rich, lots of money. They can still take it away from you. Look at what they've done to us. But if you got some bit of brains, they're not going to take that away from you. So for sure, I followed that. And I thought, I want to be a professor, I want to be all that. So by 1980, I'm back in academia, and, I just didn't want to be anything else but an academic. So to cut the long story short, though, so here we are. And I'm thinking, and I was always in a suit and a tie, I was brought up British. I went to one of those conferences.
Is that why you were wearing African attire? You're looking quite dapper, I must say.
After the Tenure Commission, I became a true African. I said, I'm not going to be anything else. I took away the tie. I'm in Africa, for heaven's sake. But I used to go to the office every day, jacket and tie, and then you put on air conditioning. You're in Africa, just open the windows and don't put on this stupid tie, So anyway.
I thought Tina should push back strongly. Seeing as you're a fashionista.
No, I know these are jabs, but I want us to maintain some modicum of...
Unfortunately, I went to one of the most conservative churches. My parents were Dutch Reformed Church.
Oh, so you're a fellow.
Yeah,
yes,
Dutch
that's my
Reformed Church.
Yes.
Until I reached the age of reason.
Another jab. I
remember driving into Fort Victoria was the Mashingo today.
Yes.
So I was believing all this stuff until I went to boarding school. And then one time we're driving from Bikita into town, and both my parents, I think it was about 63, 64, and both my parents proudly said, "Oh, you see this church? That's our church. Remember this Dutch Reformed Church?
Yes.
As soon as you enter
yes, yeah.
It looked nice. So
it's a beautiful building.
Wow! So this is where you go to church. They said, no, we don't go to this one. This is for Europeans only. Ours is in Cheke Township. And I said, I couldn't say it. I couldn't verbalize it. What kind of stupid God would say, blacks.
Church.
West. That's, I said, the moment I reach the age of reason, I'm going to stop believing in this nonsense. But anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Dorambira ipapo.
Ipapo.
Okay, you guys are never going to do well as singers.
Orambira uripapo nokuti washodoka kumbere wachikoke. Bamba, move. Anyway, so the Tenure Commission opened my eyes, and also started showing me that we are not spending enough time as Africans analyzing our situation. So I did make a recommendation, in fact, that even the traditional system could be actually codified as traditional freehold title, because that's what it was. The traditional system, once you allocated land for your family, the chief never took it back. You know that?
I do know.
No, the traditional system is once the family is allocated land, it's yours forever. You could, bequeath, subdivide it amongst your descendants. So it's a traditional freehold. The only thing is, it's for the family, not for any individual. But anyway, the long and the short is, that is the period where I started advising the government then that maybe you need to rethink this whole issue of land rights. And I had no argument with the Western style title deed, as long as it was not an either-or situation. Both traditional system and the title system can be strengthened in terms of more secure land rights. And I warned them. What happened in Kenya, I said, even a Western, no rights in the world are God-given. It's a myth. They're given by society. Okay. So when the Americans say title deeds, land rights, God-given rights, not true. These are rights given by society, which says we believe in people getting pieces of land and having all these rights. At any time, society can take those rights away, like it happened in Kenya. All those people were given title deeds from 1955. And we had the Mau Mau. And up until recently, 20 years ago, remember what happened in Western Kenya? If you're from another part of Kenya, you're Kikuyu in Leoland, and you're hanging around with a title deed, they still visit you at night and say, we think you should be moving. So title deed is not some magic thing.
So I love the point that you make about the way a tenure system works must be congruent or work well with the way the society is actually organized.
Yes.
And you can't impose an idea from outside in a particular issue like land that does not gel with the way the society is organized. And so, it made me think about, that period in Zimbabwe's history, the 1990s, ESAP, these structural adjustments, and, the way we think about economics in this part of the world, and something that I feel quite passionately about, which is one of the reasons I believe that Africa is still poor post-independence is because the liberation movements were indoctrinated and adopted Maoist, communist, socialist economic ideology, right? So when they transitioned from being liberation movements to being ruling parties and governments of the day, they had, from a philosophical policy standpoint, they believed in big governments and they believed in significant government intervention. So whatever was actually happening at the level of land tenure would be affected by this higher level of thought around how to organize an economy. And perhaps that's where the problem is, that we believe in big governments, we believe in a socialism at a certain level, where the state should have a say in how we organize ourselves,
or should hold title,
and how capital is allocated, where roads are built, and all of these things that you're speaking to in terms of rural development, that it's not being driven from the ground up but it's actually coming from the top, which is the policymakers deciding that this is how capital should be allocated. This is, where value should be created, instead of a more organic, bottom-up, setup.
I think the elephant in the room right here is the residual effects of colonialism. That's the elephant in the room. Some assume that colonialism is gone. So why are you fussing about? I mean, it's gone. Everything we have today is precisely what we believe in as Africans. The other school of thought is yes, but I'm one of the school of thought which says, of course, colonialism is gone. But the architects of colonialism know exactly what it is that they could have helped us dismantle so that we could not continue suffering from the residual effects of colonialism. For instance, they would have told us, dual economy will never deliver you an industrial society. They would have taught us political economy, which is how you manage a situation where a dual economy creates, but dual economies create monopolies, duopolies, cartels. It's not about good politics and bad politics. A dual economy demands that growth of a business has to take vertical and horizontal integration, because you don't have the infrastructure and systems for many, many small firms to add up to a big industry. So one industry, one company will take the whole thing. Okay, the Asians know how to manage that, to translate big cartels into broad-based, inclusive industries. They know how to manage the political economy. They don't kick their big businesses. They tell them how to get out of competing with small businesses and concentrate on a heavier part of the industry. That's skills that we don't. The only skills that we have is politics, then we argue and kill each other. Economics, then we are suffering, we are unemployed, and the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We don't know how to. The moment I learned the political economy lesson from the Asians, the biggest skill that we used to have traditionally, we don't have now, is how to negotiate power, how to negotiate resources. I'm your sekuru. I'm your older brother, maybe father. The most important skill we all need is negotiate. You want something from your sekuru, you negotiate it. I want something from my mzukuru. We have lost that skill. It's either black and white, fight or peace. So this is where I'm kind of disagreeing with you a little bit, to say that the residual effects of colonialism through aid and trade alone, the World Trade Organization would have done its laws differently. Aid that we get from all these industrial global north would have been different. Instead of giving us aid, they would have had more reparative justice. They would have helped us build real industrial societies. Why do you need aid if you really can help?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not that they don't know. But if we can't figure it for ourselves, religion, they figured out in the 17th century, age of reason. 2,000 years ago, when we created Christianity, we didn't know these things. Now we know, we can explain some of them differently. Age of reason. We don't take it out of your culture, but you treat it differently. So what do the Europeans do after the age of reason? They take the age of reason in the family. When you bring up your children, you don't discourage them from being Christians. You actually encourage them. But the older they get, the questions they ask, the answer becomes, they reach a stage where you then tell them, well, now you have reached the age of reason.
I suspect Mukanya will push back.
No.
That's not the
I don't
reason
have
why
a
we're
problem.
here.
I have no problem with pushback, because I think that is what it is. So in Africa, you don't reach the age of reason. You can you can live up to 96. You see. But in the United States, They let the children believe in Santa Claus and all that nonsense. But the majority of the people, how many people go to church in England? They're selling those things. They're converting them into offices. Here they are converting factories into churches, and then complain about unemployment.
On that note,
Mukaya, I'm waiting for your pushback.
not on religion, not on the show. There's still a lot that we need to discuss. So we'll veer. We are allowed. It's a rabbit hole session.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole session. So we are allowed to, segue into other issues like religion. It all affects us. So it's all very important. So for the record, I'm not going to push back because that's not the reason why we're here today. But in other forums, I would have pushed back hard. Sekuru.
Yes. I would have
Because
expected
it turns out we were in the same church. I grew up in Dutch Reformed Church.
Yeah.
So
we shared.
some commonality.
Yes.
And, at least in Androzurasa Guara. But anyway, join us in the next segment, and we will again continue on what actually happened in 1993-94 when our dear Prof went around the country and was trying to now marry the reality on the ground with the theory that he had learned in all these schools, in all these Western schools. So maybe we'll get an understanding. So join us in a few seconds. Welcome back. I hope you're thoroughly enjoying this as much as I am. No, excuse me, as much as we are in the studio. The Prof has managed to really capture the essence of land and how it evolves. And I think that for us, what we're realizing is religion plays a role, culture plays a role, politics plays a role. So it's all embedded in everything around our society. And the dualism is not necessarily to actually separate it, but it's to actually see how everything is interconnected. So I think that that's what I'm picking up. So again, let's go back to 1993, 1994,
Right.
and you're going around the country
right.
and you're picking up a lot
Of this,
the practice, and you're realizing that, well, there could be gaps with our theory, with what's actually on the ground. Please continue.
So then our commission's main recommendation to government was don't focus on what type of tenure it is. Focus on all tenure systems have scope to secure land rights. So the concept to hold on to is securing land rights, not what type of tenure, because any tenure's rights can disappear at some point. And to some extent, that was accepted by government. Cabinet actually loved the paper. I just remember I went to present to them. And then, but what was happening on the ground was that after ESOP, the economy continued to go down. The rich continued to get richer, especially the whites. They could now diversify into other products. And then they, and once again, I'm not a political scientist. I only analyze politics at a very high level. pretend to be a good political analyst, but what I believe happened was slowly unemployment doesn't go down, it continues to go up. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And eventually the whites, who are now enjoying the benefits of the economic structural adjustment program, were able to captivate the imagination of the poor. And then that's when MDC was formed as the initial, what you might call core of it, was beginning to come into place. By 1998, I remember I was participating in the preparation for a big donor conference on land, and the conference never happened. The situation politically was getting worse in terms of contestation. And when MDC was formed, it was quite clearly a coalition between the white farmers, the labor movement, and the students. So the only way to stop this thing was to chop their legs off. So they had to stop the white farmers in their tracks, but they were financing the thing. Okay, that's in summary what I think happened. So by 2000, 1998 were the first land invasions. And when those happened, something very interesting happened. I got a call from my own mentor and friend, the older gentleman who had mentored me in my youth as a professional, Dr. Robbie Mpawase. Gave me a ring and he said, "Young man, come over here." I went to see him, and he was there with an Isaac Takawira, who was CEO of Barclays Bank. And Robbie Mpawase was chairman of Barclays Bank, the largest bank at the time. They set me over there, and they said, "Young man, you did the land commission, and now look what's happening. We're having these land invasions. We need to do two things. We need to convince people to slow down these land invasions. And we also need to convince the British to start doing something, to keep the promise of forking out more money, the 28 million pounds they promised, at least something, so that we can move these people who are invading land into properly resettled farm." Remember, Dr. Robbie Mpawase was the first permanent secretary, black, of agriculture, and he was the one who had designed the original land reform program of 1981 to 83.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, and I remember I was chairman of Kingdom Bank then, and I remember agreeing to go on television to because of course being a chairman of the bank, you can imagine all these directors of the bank and the shareholders of the bank. You can imagine what their position is. Say, "Chairman, you can't allow this to happen. You have to go on television to tell people we can't have this. We need proper land. We need proper land. We need title deeds." So I said, "No, I'll talk to the public." So I went on television and said, "What we need is a organized land reform program like we used to have in the 80s. What if we did properly? We can't have these invasions." Okay, that's me on television.
Okay.
And for the first time,
A voice of reason.
for the first time in a long time, after that, I never got a call from anyone. All the people in government I expected to get a call from, no one called me. No one called. And I eventually translated that to, he doesn't know what's going on, so just leave him alone, you know. Second part, let's go and see the British High Commissioner. You do the calculation. I did a very quick calculation. How much land would we need initially to purchase to resettle the farmers who were invading the land? It came to about £5 million. Something. I did the calculations. We made an appointment to see the British High Commissioner, Mount Pleasant over there. The three of us went to see him. And Robbie says, "High Commissioner, this is our thinking." And I put on the case. I said, if you swallow your pride a little bit, you know, and fork out £5 million of the 28 you promised, this is what's going to happen. we slow this thing down and we have a
Pacify.
The High Commissioner said to me, I won't even talk to anyone. Your stupid president is dug himself up to here. Why should we rescue him? He's not going to survive this. Tried to say to him, this is Africa, my friend. The economy can go down, but the government is not going anyplace. This is not England. No, he didn't believe us. In fact, he said, no British Prime Minister can survive the backbenchers in the UK. If you try to rescue this guy. We're not talking, please eat your dessert and go. So,
Yeah.
So anyway, the rest is history. Because then you can imagine Jambanja took place. I know for your generation it looks like chaos, but it was organized chaos. But if I fast track to today, between the fast track land reform program and today, so over a period of 20 years, initially let's call it 10 years, 2000 to 2010, which is when most of it happened. A total of about 12 million or so hectares of land were acquired and distributed amongst about maybe 300,000 smallholder families and maybe 24,000 medium-sized farms. I'll hasten to say that if wishes were horses, if life was not what it is, and this was Japan after Second World War, or South Korea, or China, as that redistribution was happening, is when the structural transformation is planned. You connect these farmers straight to manufacturing. You build industries. They supply industries. Okay, that never happened. There were no resources to do it. There was no support from the donors. The same donors who supported land reform in Asia were now applying sanctions on us. So it was a period where the global north intended to prove that land reform in Africa doesn't work. And I think it was the right thing to do, given the circumstances. Just go ahead with it anyway. Okay.
So I'd like to push back a little bit. I think, I hear your thesis, but if we were to analyze the outcomes of land reform, right, without moralizing, without saying whether it was justified or not justified, it happened. We need to accept that reality.
Yes. Just like colonization happened.
Absolutely, right? So you have these new farmers on the land. 10, 20 years later, did we get the outcomes that we were looking for? Are we better off as a country for that exercise? And I would make the case that we are worse off. That if that land had stayed in the hands of the white commercial farmers over the last 25 years, our economy would be significantly bigger. There would be less poverty. We'd be better off.
No, I think, like I said earlier, these analyses make sense. If you're analyzing it at an event trend level, I would agree with you. If you're analyzing it at a strategic, structural level, you couldn't be so far away from the truth. So start by asking yourself this question. Why did thousands of young Zimbabweans, they were not old people, they were younger than you are today, why would they go in the bush for years and years to fight the same white farmers that you are glorifying today? Why would they waste their lives like that? Have you ever analyzed that or asked yourself why they would do that?
No, they believed in some ideals, I think. which is.
But before we go to ideals,
Yes.
what were they fighting against? Not what they were aiming for.
Colonialism. They were fighting against colonialism, but if you're being
Okay.
generous, and we can be extremely generous, it was only 50,000.
50,000 what?
Comrades that actually fought the war versus more than 4 million black people. So 4 million black people didn't fight the war.
You mean 50,000 carrying arms?
Carrying arms.
But the ones carrying arms, they had the easiest time. The people who were actually fighting the war were the people in the villages who were supporting them, feeding them, harboring them, and giving them invaluable information necessary to win that war. Where are you putting those numbers? They are thousands, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, fair enough.
People who actually fought the war. The one carrying the gun had the easiest time because they could threaten both sides. Okay. So anyway, let me put that aside and basically suggest that these are the types of analyses which we will not quickly have a rational disputation because we are not analyzing the same thing. We think we are comparing apples with apples, but we are comparing apples with lampshades. It's completely different. The colonial system would not allow a fully industrialized economy. You can give me an example of which colonial society where a minority of people own the majority of the land, 50% of it, and own all the industries and banks that have translated into a broad-based industrial society. Give me one example then.
Most of the developed world works like that. The vast majority of the wealth is held by a small minority.
You're not answering my question. I said, which society was colonized by a minority of people? And those people create a government. And they own half the land, all of the industries, and all of the banks, and the cities, because blacks were not allowed in the cities
I
except...
think your point is well taken.
So which society...
Because it was by law. It was apartheid by law.
There's
You
no
couldn't-
society which is a fully industrialized, high-income country through colonization. The only ones are the ones where they annihilated the local population. Canada, United States, Australia, and New Zealand. You had to exterminate the local population to be a lower population than the Europeans. Then you grow your own European population and your own civilization. Then you can get United States. But where the indigenous population remains the majority, there's not one which they were able to convert. They attempted Zimbabwe, they attempted South Africa, those were the closest, and Brazil.
No, fair enough.
Okay. So I don't think we are analyzing the same thing.
No, I hear what you're saying. And I'm not trying to push back on the necessity of bringing an end to the colonial era. All I'm simply saying is that from 1980, we had agency, we had power, and it was up to us what our destiny was going to be.
Yes. I agree with that.
And I'm making the case that if you fast forward to 2000 when we had land reform, we would have been better off economically, right? So without necessarily redistributing land.
Oh, no, I think, okay, let me make the point better.
Good.
This side of the aisle is arguing that there were only about 4,000 white farmers.
Yes.
And there was basis for redistribution because at the end of the day, it's about what society wants. And you've been very good at articulating how society creates what it wants. So fair enough, let's have land reform. But there was no reason to kick out the 4,000 farmers. You could limit the 4,000 farmers and say, well, you 4,000 farmers, you own these large pieces of land. We're going to reduce that to 500 hectares or 200 hectares. You choose the 200 hectares that you want. You keep your house. Because there was a lot of these farm invasions, you'll find that really they were after the houses and they were after the lifestyle and not necessarily after production. Could you argue against that? So that's the pushback. The pushback is it's
yeah.
just 4,000 farmers, and we could have kept the 4,000 farmers.
You have some good points. So let me put those in context.
Okay.
Let me start with the whole idea of how we would have negotiated the land reform program. So in 1993, when I was asked to chair the Land Commission, that was a primary object. I didn't talk about it because I assumed wrongly that you would understand that. But so here's what was happening. Of all the 47 districts I visited, I would visit all the classes of land: the communal, the small-scale commercial, and the white commercial farms. And overwhelmingly, the white commercial farmers were agreeing with you and me. Yes, there's some reason for land reform, but what we would rather prefer is that the land that we get as white farmers is secluded from the blacks. So we can they identified areas where they wanted to be exclusively white, so that they could maintain their lifestyle, their cultural things, country clubs, what. I personally argued throughout, because by this time I was beginning to figure out that even the young whites were struggling to remain in that industry. So I had argued that, how about if we redistributed half their land to create, at that time I was arguing for between 70 to 100,000, what you might call medium-sized farms, and get those to be integrated, black, white, or racist. That's what my argument, which came from my father, which is an idea my father talked about in the 60s.
Which is a fair argument.
Yeah. Then what you create is a proper rural middle class. Doesn't matter anymore what color you are.
Yes.
People who believe in the same things. They go to they send their kids to the same schools, the same hospitals, and go to the same church, same country club. No. I mean, it was such an emphatic no to me, I could not believe it. The white farmers
From the white farmers?
Oh, yeah.
Why would they refuse that?
Because they say we are
logical.
different. We are different. You are black. We are white. We don't mix.
So what were they doing in Zimbabwe?
Okay.
No, they had look at that. I understand.
Yeah.
It's the explanation.
So
they had
we
a hangover from colonialism. So.
But that partly answers the difficulty of creating an integrated multiracial society. That has been the most difficult thing to do for people with a European civilization. They failed throughout the world. It's not just Zimbabwe. In the United States, they had to exterminate the indigenous population. They could not integrate. In Canada, same. In parts of Latin America, same. In Australia, the same. New Zealand, the same. Tell me one society they colonized and they were able to integrate.
So I won't name a society, but the point that I will make, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity to put this out there, is that it's an ideological challenge in my mind. So if you think about the success of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, right? Because Singapore is also
this is now
it's
no longer ideological, because the whites are not claiming ideology as the differentiator. They're saying, because I'm white.
No, I understand that. So I'm not disputing that. I'm simply saying that. So one of the reasons why people become tribal like that, like the white community at that time,
but
being
that's
adamant.
Racial,
So it's racial. Racism is a form of tribalism, right? And so because it's basically in group, out group, right? Whether it's based on your race or other characteristic, right?
Also cultural.
And the common thread is your worldview tends to be zero-sum game, right? So part of the reason why they would find so much comfort in that racist worldview is this idea that we cannot accommodate the blacks without losing something, right? So, because you're coming from a zero-sum game perspective. But if you look at the world from a non-zero-sum game perspective, where you can actually make the pie bigger, where you can actually...
But they're saying we're willing to give out the land. If I capture it correctly.
No, I
They're
understand.
saying so. The white Zimbabweans, maybe it's an oxymoron, but
At that time, yeah, in 1993,
time.
yeah.
is they were saying we hear and understand the virtues of land reform. We're willing to give you the land that you need, but you need to create our own fiefdoms because of our own cultural practices and what we need,
Exactly.
which is racially based.
Yes.
And I'm saying that that's incongruent with civilization. That in itself is incongruent with civilization.
I agree with you completely.
Okay, so then
I
we're in
was
agreement.
personally so disappointed because my father had believed in that in the 60s. That's why he bought that farm in Chebutu in 1962. And the leaders then, the white guys then had believed in it. Garfield Todd. And
they were more
Federal-
liberal.
yeah,
They were
they
the
more
liberals. This is why I'm making the
They
case
were
that
more
it's
liberal.
But
ideological.
that's the reason they also then lost the election because the majority of the whites, even more liberal ones, when some young
It
guy,
was a
white
threat to
guy
their life.
actually did a study. He convinced me that it's more nationalism, and for the white, okay, it's a combination of nationalism and racism because they had fought us, they defeated us in using better guns, and they think, but we defeated. If you actually look at their narrative, we defeated them. What do you call it when you win land through war?
Subjugated.
No.
Yeah.
When you win land through war.
Spoils of war.
Yeah, so I think it's
Okay,
interesting.
we're being told that we need to round up. So
Oh, okay.
Okay, I just want to push back a little bit.
I think I've given because it's now 2 hours. So Prof, we're gonna give you enough time to explain the future of land tenure. If I get you correctly so far, your message is it must be an integrated thought process. It can't be one that is in isolation of the realities on the ground, on the practices that are actually happening on the ground. That perhaps when we're planning on a land tenure system, even today, perhaps the good thing that we need to do is to again go back on the ground.
Again, go back on the ground. And over the 40 years, the situation has changed sufficiently, and so has my analysis and recommendations.
Okay, go ahead.
So 25 years, call it, let's just say 20 years after fast-track land reform program. During that period, I was thinking, let's create a land bank, we'll get the larger part of the land, like A2, into a land bank. We do this, that's the one we fast-track in connecting to manufacturing, industrialization, we'll bring in the other one, et cetera, et cetera. That never happened. Not having a clear land rights system was worrying me to death. So what has happened over the last year or so when the government then promulgated this new land tenure policy? Let's give title deeds to all the former white-owned land, A2, A1, and the old resettlement. The reason I have wanted this to, because people have asked me, this is a question I've been asked twice in my life. I've been asked this kind of question. First was in 2009. Our name, people sat me down and said, you're going back to Zim to go and facilitate the government of national unity? You think it's going to work? And I didn't know where the answer came from. I think it came from wherever. I said to them, does anyone really know it's going to work? I don't even ask myself that question. The question I ask myself is, do I want it to work? And I want the government of national unity to work. Because it's no longer about which political party, it's about saving the nation. That was my response. Okay. And it's a similar response to this new policy of government. People ask me, do you think it's going to work? Or do you know where it's going to work? Why are you asking me? I don't ask myself that question. The question I ask myself is, do I want it to work? And I want it to work. Because if this policy is not going to work,
We're in trouble.
we're in serious trouble. Because the enclosure movement is here. People don't understand this. That when you start urbanizing fast, well, you see, urbanization in Africa, including Zimbabwe, is not driven by manufacturing. There's no manufacturing jobs here. It's driven by services. Okay, people are coming to town because you may have a little better access to education, a little better clinic with more medicine in it, and the networks are better.
Electricity.
People. God created us so that we can multiply in the billions. He did not do that to land. He only created a certain amount. It's not going to increase. Our numbers will increase. The land won't increase. And as long as urbanization continues as fast as it is happening now, you better hang on to whatever land you have. You better formalize whatever land rights you have. The idea that somehow the traditional system is going to help you, too bad. Even the traditional system is crashing.
It's being
They are
overtaken by
overtaking, they're even selling that land.
Yes.
So I see one of the ambassadors asked me when I met them someplace and said, "Are you Professor Rukuni?" I said, yes. He says, "Are you the land expert?" I said, "I used to be." He says, "Why are people abandoning their rural land in Zimbabwe?" I see I say, there's a lot of people abandoning their land thinking, I don't have a job, I better go to town. Big mistake. But there are others who are leaving town and picking up that land and adding value to that land. So I want this program to work because if it doesn't work, you can kiss goodbye the idea that we will have a modern economy. So for it to work, and this is what I think is the important thing. Number one, we really need a very strong land administration governance system from village to town. It's no longer about where, everywhere it should be clear who is on what piece of land, with what rights. Any changes that happen there have to be captured so that we can minimize conflict and so forth and formalize these land rights, including communal areas. The idea that we'll wait for communal areas, fine, it's government decision, but we even need it more there. You know why? Because the rural district councils also want that land. They're just as bad as the urban centers. They're going to go out there and extract as much land as possible, especially land close to the towns.
Yeah.
Because once you convert agricultural or rural land to urban land, the value goes up 20 times. So people, we need a very well informed, structured process of ensuring that as many people as possible formalize their land rights. And it's a conversation, if you want, we can have some other time, but it's not a time to, let's think about it. The rest of the world, which reads fundamentals, not emotion, we have already figured out this country is ready for the future. They are coming here in the droves, whilst we're arguing.
Okay, so governance from village level right through to urban.
Yeah.
And the real reason why we need to do this, it's actually, what you're saying is there's a population explosion.
Yes.
That's actually happening, which is true because when you look at the Zimbabwean economy, the population-wise, we've doubled in the last 30 years. So if you
You've
sort
been
of
busy, you guys.
extrapolate, yeah. If we extrapolate, there's going to be that population explosion, and there's finite land. So maybe first basis, get the governance right. Second, what else do we need to do?
Second is to tie this land titling program to economic activity. It's not let's do this, then next. It has to happen immediately at the same time. So here's examples. It is important that government, private sector investors start seeing the benefits of rural industries as the primary industries. When England was industrializing as the first modern one, Light industry happens in the rural areas. Light industry doesn't happen in Harare at Coca-Cola corner. We go, light industry. No. Light industry is in the rural areas. This is where just basic machines are used to improve the application of labor in farming, the application here. So this is where we need the investors now. We don't need investors to build factories in Harare where no one is going to get a job because they are using modern technology that only requires 6 people to run a whole factory. We need investors
in the rural economy,
to improve, first and foremost, productivity of agriculture and link it immediately to non-agricultural activities. When Minister July Moyo was still Minister of Local Government, I still remember saying to him, why are you upgrading all these places into, now this is town, this is now, no, city. If it's not manufacturing, if the majority of activity in a place is not manufacturing, it's not a town. Doesn't matter how big physically it is.
Or number of people are there, yeah.
Okay, make every little town. Marondera, Chinoi, Mazingo, they should be manufacturing towns. Then you know you're on your way. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the second bit. So those are the two things that we need to do. It's governance and then link the tenure system with the economy.
Yes.
Whatever you're doing, you need to link it with the economy so that we actually industrialize in our rural areas.
Yes.
So what you're calling for is industrialization in the rural areas. Yes. And if I get you right, because if I look at what we're currently doing with our system is we're so fixated in fixing the big farm problem. When what we should really do is let it solve itself. What we need to solve is the small farmer, the smallholder system where the majority of us actually live, where we actually already have land.
You've put it better than PhD economics. That's exactly what we need to do. I'm telling you.
Thank you, Sekuru. And on that note, I think that this was very good because it helps us just understand really from a global perspective. You can see how religion, how politics, how economics, and culture all play an important role. We went really down to pre-colonial time. We went philosophical, just understanding different systems and why those systems are there. We went global. We understood what actually happened in Japan. We had a discourse in America. We had a discourse with, religion as well. And then I think that where we sort of all agree, and to your point, I've actually, so my moment, my epiphany is, again, in my 40s, I've realized that I need to go back Kumusha and industrialize Kumusha. I certainly agree with you that perhaps all of us have Kumusha. And if we have some sort of economic activity, Kumusha, and that particular land has some sort of security, you're not going to lose it. It was my father's land, it's now mine, and I'm keeping it for my kids. But if there's a bit of activity, then they can work on it and we can develop. So I quite like that let's focus on the rural economy. You're seeing a revolution that's actually happening, especially with our age group that...
you guys have figured
that wants to lose money via this midlife crisis
crisis.
Obsession with Kumusha.
Our midlife crisis is with Kumusha. That's how it's playing out.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's how our midlife crisis is playing out.
You guys are better off than the younger ones. The next generation after you, they cannot even manage a wife. The young men are in trouble.
That's for another day. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Please continue to share, and as the conversation goes on, please, let's hear your comments. We're not necessarily out to agree. We think that we're out to have a conversation, and that's why it's at a bar. And thank you very much for indulging us. Truly, this is more than
another hour, but alas,
we're being told. You know who's in charge now, right?
I figured it out the moment I walked in. Yeah, just as well.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So thank you very much and enjoy yourself. And we're probably going to see you maybe early next year. we will enjoy the festivities, and that's why we had this very long session, because you'll have time at home and with family, and you can actually enjoy and engage with the ideas that we have here. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy your festive season, and let's see you next year.
Cheers.
Cheers.